Hey everybody, it's John King. Welcome to my weekly live update. For some of you, this is the first time that you are seeing it because I've got a few different channels and I don't normally broadcast this live update across all my channels. This one's a big one. So I'm going to broadcast this one everywhere. So hopefully you guys are seeing that. We'll see value in this. There are three topics that I want to talk about today. The first thing is what's happening with interest rates this week. What direction did they go and why? And every single week I update you on that. The second thing I want to talk about is the California Dream for All program. And all I'm going to say is I literally wrote the book on the Dream for All program. And the third thing I want to talk about, and what I want to spend the most time on, is what the heck is about to happen with how buyers pay their realtor. Because you're about to see some significant changes, and I'm going to share with you everything about how that works. So let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, what's happening with interest rates right now? This has not been a good week for interest rates. What we saw is last week we had last Friday we had the jobs report, and that was a mixed bag. But we saw that really we didn't see rates go up almost at all, and we were nervous that they were going to. This week on Tuesday we got the inflation report. It showed inflation going up, and inflation is bad. So remember, I keep telling you the biggest things that the Fed is paying attention to this year is what's happening with jobs and what's happening with inflation. They are convinced inflation is down. They're worried inflation is going to pop back up if jobs continue to grow. Last week showed jobs were continuing to grow. This week showed inflation was still going up. And so we thought on Tuesday we'd see a really big bump in interest rates, and we didn't when the inflation report came out. But we saw the bump on Wednesday. We saw the bump yesterday. We saw a little bit of a bump this morning. So the week is ending poorly when it comes to interest rates. We are back at, for most people, touching 7%. That's still way better than the 8% that we were at back in October, but it's been a rocky road. We were down in the low to mid sixes in January. February popped up to 7 to 7.25. The end of February, beginning of March was looking promising. We thought we had a chance, and then we lost some ground. And this week is the week we're losing ground. So we'll see where we end up, but it's going to be a rocky road. We are for sure, the Fed has made it clear, they are going to lower interest rates, and mortgage rates are going to go with them. The question is when, and the bigger question is what's going to happen in between. Okay, so that's the critical thing. Keep paying attention. If you don't normally see this update, if you're on one of my channels, it doesn't normally get this update, go to YouTube and subscribe to John Lone King. So just search John Lone King. You'll get this update every single week on that YouTube channel. All right, so quickly I want to talk about the book that I wrote, and I literally wrote the book. The book is on the California Dream for All program. It is just in final editing of my digital book, and it should be able to be sent out this weekend or worst case Monday morning. So if you want a copy of the book, it is designed for buyers, and it's a comprehensive guide to the California down payment assistance program, the Dream for All, California Dream for All program. So if you want that, email me. The email address is in the description below. We're going to be launching a landing page that you can register there and have a copy sent to you automatically. But I want to get the word out because this program is launching April 3rd, and the registration for your ability to get in on the lottery ends on Monday, April 29th. So I'm trying to get as much information out there as quickly as I possibly can on this program. So if you or someone you know is looking at utilizing the Dream for All program, whether you've already whether you already have your pre-approval letter or not, I want to get you my book. So you can email me. The link is down below in the description. And I'll push out the landing page once we have it ready. But right now, just email me and get a copy of the book early next week as soon as it is released. All right. The last thing, the most important thing that happened today, there was a settlement that was proposed. Now, proposed means that this is going back, by the way, proposed by the National Association of Realtors on a lawsuit that they lost back on Halloween, October 31st of 2023. And it's a case in Missouri where home sellers were suing realtors saying, you forced me to pay for the buyer's commission. Why did I have to pay for the real estate agent representing the buyer? Okay, so what we're dealing with now is we've been dealing for the last few months with a lot of uncertainty of, well, the National Association of Realtors and some of the largest real estate companies in the nation were sued, and they lost. And they lost a big amount of money. And now that settlement that came out today is saying, hey, instead of us paying you these trillions of dollars, we're gonna pay you billions of dollars, whatever it is. We're gonna pay. Look, once it gets over a certain number, I don't care if it's millions, trillions, billions, it's a lot more money than any of us have ever seen, right? So they, the National Association of Realtors, proposed a settlement today. What does that mean to you as the home buyer? Well, the National Association of Realtors admitted no wrongdoing, but they agreed, if the settlement is accepted, that starting this summer, starting the middle of July, which, by the way, for anybody on here who's utilizing the Dream for All program, this is literally going to start while you are out shopping for a home. No longer are sellers going to automatically pay for your real estate agent. No longer do buyer's agents that represent the buyer get automatically paid by the seller of the home. What's going to happen, what they proposed in the settlement, if it's accepted, is that as a buyer, you are going to have to negotiate with the realtor you're working with on what their fee is going to be. Now, their fee has ranged anywhere from 1.5% to 3% of the sales price of the home, but that was paid for by the seller. And so the buyers really didn't pay a lot of attention to it because the seller just built that into the price of their home, which makes sense because the seller is providing an incentive. It's no different than the salesperson at the car dealership that the seller says, hey, I'm going to hire a salesperson at the car dealership to sell my cars. They're going to help you figure out which car is the right car. I'm going to pay them, though. Actually, a better example is the senior care industry. So if you know anything about independent or assisted living facilities, in the senior care industry, those facilities have their own internal salespeople, and their job is to sell you to come to live in their facility. But there are people that work as independent placement consultants, and you don't pay them. If you have a family member that needs to get into a facility, you can hire one of these independent or retain the services of one of these independent consultants, and you pay them nothing because they get paid by the facility as an incentive to bring you to that facility and look at it. It's how the world goes around. People who want to sell something pay for the salespeople that find the buyer. That's how it works. But it looks like that's not going to work anymore in real estate. And it looks like what's going to happen is you as the buyer are going to have to say, hey, I got to hire somebody and I have to negotiate what the fee is to that person. I don't know about you, but most of my buyers don't have a lot of money to pay for a down payment on a home. They don't have a lot of money to pay for closing costs, and they don't have any extra money to pay for the realtor. And so now it becomes, now home ownership is even further away from me. And I do not want you to feel that way. There are solutions. There are ways this is going to work, but it's going to be a bumpy road. What I want to impress upon you is the fact that through this bumpy road, you have to recognize you're going to hear things that aren't going to make sense. You're going to hear somebody say, don't buy a home anymore because you have to pay for your realtor. Yes, you are agreeing for how much the compensation is that your realtor is going to pay. But your realtor still has the right to write in the contract when you offer to buy a home to say, I want you, the seller, to pay that percentage that was agreed to by the buyer and their realtor. Now, the seller doesn't have to accept it. This makes it part of the negotiation, and we are going to see people who are going to be willing to pay the realtor on their own, which means that they don't have to have the seller pay it. And so in a competitive market like we're in right now, and the market's going to get even more competitive as interest rates go down and more buyers want to buy, and there still aren't enough homes for all you buyers to buy. It's going to become a more competitive market. And the more competitive the market, the more the seller says, I don't need to pay for any of those extra things. I've got people who are willing to buy the house and they aren't asking me to pay for those things. And so you have to figure out, how do I make my offer look the best it can possibly look? Now, the challenge is some loan programs, specifically VA, prohibit the buyer from paying their realtor. Hold on a second. The National Association of Realtors just said from here forward, starting mid-July, if this all comes the way it's laid out, that the buyer has to contractually pay their realtor. And the Veterans Administration says buyers are not allowed to pay their realtors. That's a train wreck ready to crash in front of us. That has to get resolved, or we're going to have a lot of veteran buyers aren't able to use VA loans if they have to pay for their own buyer. So there's a lot of things that have to get worked out here. There's a lot of challenges we have to deal with, but the fact of the matter is we just have to figure it out because it's the new rules and the way things are going to go. Ultimately, I think that in most cases, the seller will likely still pay for the commission because that's still part of the cost of selling a home. But I think it's going to be a rocky road. I think some sellers are going to get greedy and they're going to say, if I don't have to pay for it, I'm not going to. But just like paying for title and escrow fees, it's customary in certain markets that you split those 50-50. It's customary in certain markets that the seller pays the entire amount of the transfer tax. Well, will it be customary that the seller pays for the buyer's commission? I'm thinking yes. The problem is that commission amount is negotiable. And now it's, well, my buyer's agent agreed to pay, or my buyer agreed to pay the buyer's agent 5%. Is that customary? No. So therefore, you as the buyer will be responsible to pay your agents any amount that the seller didn't pay. That's the scary part. That's the part that we don't know. And you've retained the services of this realtor. They're going out and spending their time, their gas. They're making no money unless you complete the transaction. And yet they don't know now, if you don't have the cash to pay for them, the only way they're getting paid is if they negotiate their payment into the contract. And here's where the ethical issue comes up. Realtors are a fiduciary. It is their responsibility to put your interest in front of their own. So what if the seller says, I'm not willing to pay you? What if the seller says, I'm not willing to pay for the realtor's commission? I accept the offer. I'll sell it to your buyer, but I'm not going to pay you. Now what? Now what is your realtor supposed to do? Now you can say, my God, the realtor should just let me buy it then and step away because that's the right thing to do. Okay. Well, would you want to do that? If your employer said to you, hey, John, you can go to work and I'll decide after you put in, I'll pay you once a month. And after 2 weeks in, I'll let you know whether or not you're going to get paid for that month or not. So wait a second, I've already done 2 weeks of the work. And then you're going to tell me whether I'll get paid for the whole month. Now, granted, I can stop working halfway through the month because I know I'm not going to get paid. The realtor can say, fine, I'm out, and they don't have to do the rest of the work, but they've done all the work to get you to that point. So how do they get fairly compensated for the work that they're doing? Unfortunately, we can't go back and put the genie in the bottle. We can't change the lawsuit. We can't change this settlement and where it's going to go. We have to figure out what the unintended consequences are going to be. And I don't know what they're going to be. I got a comment here. Let's see who's saying something. All right. So I've got a comment from DM in regards to the Dream for All program. In this scenario where you make $120,000 with zero debts and a FICO score over 660, what would be the max loan amount provided to the borrower? Okay. So if you are buying a, where you make 120,000, oh, your income. Okay. That's DM, if you wouldn't mind, if you could email me, I'll go through that with you specifically. It's a math question, and I don't want to take the time for everybody in this live broadcast to go through that. I appreciate the question. As a matter of fact, I'll go back into comments and I'll type the comment into comments later, so you can email me or not. I'll give you your answer in the comments. But this is the challenge we're dealing with right now, is what is the change to the landscape in real estate? How is that going to impact buyers? But how's that going to impact the real estate industry? Buyers agents right now are the lifeblood of helping you search for a home. And their paychecks just got completely changed. Their ability to navigate the waters with you are unknown whether or not they're going to be able to get compensated unless, and by the way, you are technically going to have to sign a contract up front that says, I'm going to pay you, the realtor, X% of whatever house I find, unless the seller is willing to pay for it. So now you have to figure out, what the heck am I going to do if the seller's unwilling to pay for it? Do I walk away from that house? Maybe you do. But it's going to create a lot of unintended consequences. And I want to be ahead of this curve, and I want to explain it to you, because the settlement that was proposed this morning, if it's accepted, is going to go into effect in mid-July. And it means that the listing is not allowed to advertise, we're going to pay a certain amount towards the buyer's commission. They have to completely separate it, and it becomes just another, it's no different than normal closing costs now. which is you as the buyer are responsible for closing costs, you can ask the seller, hey, will you pay a certain amount of money towards my closing costs? And you negotiate for the seller to pay that. The problem is that if this really is considered just another closing cost, well, first of all, there's limits by the federal government on how much you're allowed to pay as a buyer in fees to buy a home. Is the federal government going to raise those limits? Or are we going to have an issue where we exceed the federal government's guidelines for how much I'm allowed to charge you? And by the way, not just what, all those fees aren't my fees. The fees the title company charges you, the fees the appraiser charges you, the fees that you pay for other service providers gets thrown into one number. And then the federal government forces me as your lender to add all those together and say, how much is that as a percentage of the amount of money you're borrowing? And in the state of California, it's even more restrictive. They're trying to protect the consumer. They're trying to say, hey, if you as a lender are charging them all of this money, that's way too much money to charge them. Of course, they have to add a whole bunch of fees that aren't our lender's fees. But California is trying to protect you. I totally understand it. But the fact of the matter is, now if we add your commission you're paying a realtor to that number, let's say you're willing to pay them, technically that's a closing cost you have to pay. Technically, that could trigger this becoming a high cost loan. In some areas, a high cost loan means you have to include taxes and insurance in your payment. So imagine you have your own money to pay for your down payment. But, excuse me, a big down payment, you got your own money to pay for your down payment, and you have your own money to pay for your realtor. But I'm going to force you to have to include taxes and insurance in your payment when you don't want to, because you're now considered a high cost loan because it costs you more money to buy the house than what the federal government allows. There's a lot of unintended consequences that we're dealing with here. And there's a lot of things that we need to figure out over the next few months before this launches. But the final piece of this is if you negotiate it for the seller to pay it, it could trigger the cap that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and FHA and VA, they all set a cap that says, hey, you can only ask the seller to pay a certain percentage of your purchase price to cover the buyer's closing costs. And that's in place because they figure, hey, if you got the seller paying a huge amount towards closing costs, that's too big of an incentive. And that's considered an inappropriate concession, too much money that's changing hands backwards, going back from the seller to the buyer to give them an incentive. The thinking on the side of the government entities that run lending is, hey, if you need to give them that much of an incentive, you should have just lowered the price. Like, we're playing some games here if we keep the price up here and credit them a bunch of money. Well, the problem is we now have to allow the seller to credit you to pay your realtor's fees. How's that going to work out? There's a lot of unknowns. What I'll tell you is it's going to work out. The system is not going to collapse. It's not going to fall apart. This is not going to be the end of realtors as we know it. Okay, that was kind of my joke this morning. Is I was gonna play the REM song "The End of the World as We Know It" because I'm imagining there's a lot of realtors right now feeling like I got to go find another job. I got to go work somewhere else because I can't survive now. I won't even be able to get paid from my clients. Okay, this is not that much different than what's happening in the mortgage world and credit reports. For different reasons, we used to pay for everybody's credit report in the past. When you would apply for a loan, it was like, no big deal, we'll cover your credit report fee. And now the credit report fees have gone up so much that most lenders are charging up front for the cost of a hard credit report. And many lenders said, oh my gosh, my buyers are never going to work with me. They're not willing to write me a check up front for $50 to pay for their credit report. I haven't had any issues with it. I haven't had anybody complaining about it. It's when you go to rent an apartment, you have to pay for your credit report. So paying me for your credit report is not a big deal, but we think that it is. And so just understand, if you're a realtor, you have to shift your thinking. You have to understand this is a level playing field that every one of your competitors are dealing with, and you're going to have to just figure it out. But it's not going to impact only you. It's impacting everybody. And if you can figure out how to communicate to your buyers better, you're going to win. For you buyers, don't freak out. Don't say, oh my gosh, homeownership is not for me. I can't make this work, because the reality is you need to take care of your future, and homeownership. The wealth built through homeownership is the single best vehicle to help you make that happen. Homeowners, depending on what you read, are 4 to 10 times wealthier than non-homeowners. So you need to figure out, how do I get past that? And we can't change the landscape. We can't change what's happening with these lawsuits and how that's impacting these settlements. We have to just figure out how to communicate well, how to digest it, how to navigate through it. And I'm going to be your guide to get through to the other side. So guys, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Please share this video, share my message, and make sure that you get a copy of my book. So email me, kingteam@JohnLoneKing, the description. The email address is in the description down below, where you can get a copy of my book. I literally wrote the book on how to take advantage of the California Dream for All program, and I'm looking forward to being your lender for any needs you have for anything mortgage related. Thanks, everybody, and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.